Amazing. All right, I'm going to admit the people in the waiting room. Let's see, we got some people joining. Hello, everyone. I think everyone has made it in. We're expecting a lot more people than this, so we'll give everyone another few seconds to make it in. Hey, Arnold. Hey, Charles. Hey, Raina.
Hey, hey.
Good afternoon. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
All right. Well, we are officially at the top of the hour, so I can, before we get started, just introduce our amazing speaker. First of all, thank you all for being here. It's such a pleasure to have you. And thank you, Professor Gottlieb, for being here, especially as one of our new speakers this semester. Professor Gottlieb is an associate professor of mathematics at Rhodes College. And I'm really excited for all of you to get to learn from him and hear about his experiences and the latest works, his projects that he's working on. So with that, I will officially hand the virtual mic over to you, Professor. Take it away.
Thank you, Sophie. So first of all, I'm real excited by this invitation and appreciate your guys' interest in being here. So maybe could you say just a little bit about yourselves and your interest in this series? Just a real quick hello and tell me who you are. Arnold, maybe we could start with you.
I am Arnold Engelberg, and I'm just interested in picking up some extra knowledge.
Outstanding. Lewis, I know about you, but tell everybody else about you. You may be speaking. You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, fine. Hello, Eric.
Hi,
hello,
Lewis.
Everybody else. I'm here to see what you have to tell us and teach us today, Eric.
Okay, great. And Charles, how about you? I know you as well.
Yes, well, I'm Charles Belenke, and I'm here mostly because I often face the tension between belief in the traditional God and the biblical version of reality, and then what mathematics and science teaches us. And sometimes they don't feel like they go together.
Gotcha. Wonderful. Well, you actually, so there's a wonderful book called, oh gosh, I'm blocking the name of it right now, but there are actually applications of mathematics to that very question. If God was there, how would we know? And there's an area of mathematics called game theory that at least one fellow has tried to use to answer that question. So that's a fun one. Maybe we can talk about that another day. If I had thought about that, I might have made this presentation about that. Hal, how are you? Welcome. Can you tell us just a little bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm on the Hillel of Memphis Advisory Council at the University of Memphis and Rhodes, and looking forward to your presentation today. Thank you for the time.
Wonderful. Glad you're here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And this is what we're talking about today. The title, Understanding Garbled Speech, How Error-Correcting Codes Make Communication Possible. And I wanted to start by pointing out that you guys are already intimately familiar with error-correcting codes because you use one every day, namely our natural language. So if I make a mistake when I'm talking, you still understand exactly what I mean. That's because there's enough surrounding context in my meaning so that you can extract what I meant to say. I didn't mean to say mistake, I meant to say mistake. So you can correct that error on your own. And so let's just take a look at how communication works. In an ideal setting, I have some intended message that I want to send to you. And by the way, if at any point you have a question, feel free to just jump in, unmute yourself and speak up with any question you might have. I have some intended message that I want to send to you. I send that message perfectly. Nothing happens in between. and you receive exactly the message that I intended. In that case, everybody's happy, and we go on with our lives, hopefully better for the exchange. In the real world, it often happens that we'll have some intended message over here, and somewhere between our conceiving of what that intended message is and the message being received, something happens in between. A lot of different things can happen. Sometimes your tongue just stumbles, like when I said mistakes. That's just a mistake of my tongue. So even though I sent, that's exactly the message I sent, it wasn't the one I meant to send. For other kinds of communications, like for example, with your cell phone or with our computer, sometimes other mistakes happen, such as, for example, a lightning strike or sunspots can create problems. There are other problems that can happen as well, power surges. And that can result in a received message that's different from the one that was intended. And obviously, sometimes that's no big deal. If your cell phone communication gets a little garbly, you just say, oh, could you please resend? But other times, it could have rather serious consequences. So here are some examples. I mentioned some examples already, but natural language is the first one that most of us meet as an example of an error correcting code. Our cell phones also use error correcting codes. They're embedded in the software and hardware that make them go. Computer memory, like random access memory, RAM, that uses error correcting codes because sometimes those zeros and ones get flipped around. And so we have to be able to recover or at least detect when there's an error been made. Satellites use error correcting codes as well in their communications. Lots of others out there. And I included this picture right here. This is a photo that was sent to us by Perseverance from Mars back on August 10th. Beautiful photo, high res, lots of information there. Many, 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 many zeros and ones being sent across millions of miles in space. It takes somewhere between 5 and 20 minutes, depending on where Earth and Mars are located relative to each other, for these zeros and ones to reach us from Perseverance. So, and you can imagine that errors are likely in that situation because of all kinds of deep space phenomena, whether it's cosmic rays or sun flares or what have you. So if we want to be able to recover beautiful images like this, we need to be able to correct errors as they occur. Now, I've tried to motivate this with some common and natural examples for you, where, so for instance, our natural language, things we use every day like cell phones, things we use maybe without knowing it like satellites. By the end of this talk, we're going to go take kind of a deep dive into some, I don't want to say abstract mathematics, but mathematics that you don't see every day. This is not your high school algebra. I'm not going to be proving theorems or anything like that, but the point is just to motivate how that mathematics, sometimes it may feel like, why are we talking about cubes in 100 dimensions? Like that just seems like a needless abstraction. Turns out it's actually really useful. So, and you'll see why as we go on. Okay, so this is a photo from Mars Perseverance. Now let's imagine that we want to send one of 4 messages. I might want to say hi, try, fly, or bye. But I can only send it in zeros and ones. So I don't want to be wasteful and use a whole bunch of extra symbols. So if I'm just going to use zeros and ones, I could say hi use 0, 0 to encode a hi, and a 0, 1 to encode a try, and 1, 0 for fly, and 1, 1 for bye. Now, my question for you is, if I make a mistake, like let's say that somehow or other I type 0, 1 by accident, or maybe a lightning strike happens and the 0, 0 turns into a 0, 1, then instead of receiving the message hi, what are you going to receive? Try, says Hal. And there's no way that we would know that an error happened because we received one of the code words that we had intended, right? So although this code has the advantage of being very concise, that is to say, we don't have to send long strings of symbols, it has a disadvantage that any error we make is going to 100% be misinterpreted, and we won't be able to recover what was actually intended. So here's a way around that. What if instead of 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, what if I put 3 zeros for each 0 and 3 1s for each 1? Now let's imagine that one error occurs when I'm sending hi. So I might get something like 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0. Or here, I'm going to spotlight this. So if an error occurs here, I might get 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0. Now, Arnold, if you received a message that said 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, what would you think was the intended message? Out of these 4 options.
Would it be try? Would it be try?
Right, try is an option. Let's see, so try says 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1. If we compare try with the signal that was received, all 3 of these, they differ right here. This third 0 is a 1, but also all 3 of these 1s are 0. So that looks pretty far apart. But what if we compare it with this one up here? These only, the high 0, 0, 0 and 0, 0, 0, those all agree except for 1, right?
Right.
So this is pretty close to high. Even though it's not exactly right, it would be reasonable for us to maybe interpret it as high, even though it's slightly different. Does everyone see that? It certainly wouldn't be by, it might be fly. That one only differs in 2 places, right? So the point is, the one that is in some sense closest to the received signal is this high right up here, which was the intended one. Now, if we make 2 mistakes, or if 2 mistakes happen, now we're in trouble because this is closest to by, right? We meant to say hi, but what they're going to correct it to would be by. So the point is that we can make maybe 1 mistake and fix it, but we can't fix it if there's 2 or more mistakes. Does that make sense so far, everyone? Any questions? Okay, so I think, we've improved the previous, let me delete that. We've improved the previous, sorry, I think I need a mouse here. Right, so we can recover the intended message, but we've paid a price, which is we've made it longer. So I hope you agree, this is an improvement over the previous code, even though that improvement comes at cost, right? There's a cost there, which means we have to send more stuff that takes longer, right? Like we need more bandwidth or more time to send the greater number of digits. All right, so could we do better than this? In order to achieve the ability to correct one error, we had to triple the number of digits that we were sending. I want to share with you a way we can make this even better. And now we're sort of moving into the territory of higher dimensional cubes. So let's just see what I mean. Let's say we're only sending 1 digit. So we have either a 0 or a 1, right? So I've joined these 2 by a line because they only, like if I change this 0 to a 1, I get the other one. And likewise, if I change the 1 to a 0, I get the 0. Okay, now we're back up here to our high, by, try, fly example. If I change the first 0 to a 1, I get this one down here, right? So the fact that they're connected means they differ by one change. Here we have this 0, 0. If I change the second 0 to a 1, we get this one. But there is no single change I can make to 0, 0 to get 1, 1. So those don't get a line between them. Does everyone see that? Y'all know how to use your react buttons? Like, so you can give a thumbs up or whatever, if you understand? Okay, so right, so we got a square. The square is a natural model for the high, by, try, fly code that we used earlier. Well, we can also ask ourselves, what if we had 3 digits that we were using? So this top, so here we have 0, 0, 0. That's one of our code words. And if we change the first digit, that's connected to 1, 0, 0 down here. If we change the second one, that's connected to 0, 1, 0. Or if we change the third one, we get 0, 0, 1. And if you continue in that way, what you'll see is that you get the structure of a cube. Louis, is this making sense? Charles, are you following?
Somewhat, Eric, yeah.
Okay, good. Charles, how about you?
Yes, I'm with you. I can
Fantastic.
see how graphically a cube represents the points on with 3 digits.
Right, with 3 digits. Exactly. And Audrey, I meant to say welcome. I saw you come in, but I was in mid-sentence, so I just wanted to say hello.
Hi, thank you.
Great. Okay. So here, and now we can keep doing this. If we instead use words of length 4, this gives us a 4-dimensional cube. And if we use digits of length, sequences of digits of length 5, this is a 5-dimensional cube. I haven't really explained exactly how we get from one dimension to the next, but I will leave it. We can talk about that later if you like. Maybe we can draw some pictures or whatever. Basically, all we're doing is, here, watch this. To go up from the square to the cube, what I did was I made another copy of that same structure and then connected the corresponding vertices like that. And that's how we move up in dimension. So I would make another copy of this one like I did down here and connect the corresponding vertices. And that's how we can move up in dimension. All right. So what we need to do then is we could go hunting for, like, let's take a look at this right here. Look at this 0, 0, 0 and this 1, 1, 1 right here. Notice, let's look at the vertices. Actually, you know what? I'm going to use a different color for 1, 1, 1. For 1, 1, 1, I'm going to use blue. Okay, so if I make one error, the ones that I'm going to wind up with are either 0, 1, 1 or 1, 1, 0 or 1, 0, 1. So if I make just one error, that's where I am. Now, on the other hand, if I make one error when I sent 0, 0, 0, then I'll either get this one or that one or that one. And this is what allows us to make that correction that we talked about before when we tripled the digits, right? Like in place of 0, we wrote 0, 0, 0. In place of 1, we wrote 1, 1, 1. The fact that this 0, 0, 0 and 1, 1, 1 are far apart on the cube, allowed us to make those corrections, because just one correction leads us to stuff that's definitely closer to 1, 1, 1 than 0, 0, 0. So what about, could we do that with, instead of in a better way? And the answer is yes, we can. So let's take a look at how that works. We're going to use the 5-dimensional cube to do it. Let me erase these drawings. All right, so let's suppose for high, try, fly, and by, now we're representing them with just 5 digits. But I claim we can still correct one error. Why is that? Here we are. So I haven't written down all of the vertices because it's too complicated. It would make it look really cluttered. But let's see where they sit. So here's 0, 0, 0, 0 right there. And in pink, next to 0, 0, 0, 0 are its neighbors, right? It has 5 neighbors. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Similarly, here's try, which is 0, 1, 1, 1 right there. I put it in yellow, and its 5 neighbors appear in light yellow right here. Then for fly, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, that's way over here in blue, along with its 5 light blue neighbors. And then finally in black, I put by 1, 1, 1, 0, 0. And then in gray are its 5 neighbors. So we're able to get like a little ball of these lighter colors around the code words that we want to send, right? It's like the neighbors of these special code words, they don't overlap. They're separate. Now, we didn't wind up using all of the vertices. Like notice here, there's these ones that appear in white. Those didn't get used by anybody. So those are sort of wasted. In a sense, it's like excess, stuff that's left over. So this really summarizes the main idea of coding theory, which is if we build in enough redundancy, then we can recover the intended message, provided there aren't too many errors. And that extra redundancy comes at a cost. The cost is that we wind up making the message longer. And so our goal is to make the communication as robust as possible while still keeping it as short as possible. And so we're balancing these two conflicting impulses, more redundancy, but we don't want to make it too long. That's our objective here. This discipline, coding theory, or the theory of error correcting codes, was put on a firm foundation initially by Claude Shannon, and he was the one who first quantified the interplay between those conflicting objectives of making it robust and keeping it short. All right, so let me try to present this one more way, sort of geometrically here. And any questions so far? Did I lose anybody? Sophie, is all this making sense?
Yes, and I love the visuals. I'm a visual learner, so it's definitely helpful.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's an example, right? So just like before, we had some big universe of possible words. I think of those as all sequences of zeros and ones of length 5 in our previous example. And only certain of those, here are the ones that appear in black as being, those are the ones that we want that have actual meaning. Like this one's high, and this one's by, and this one's fly, and that one's try. Maybe this is guy, and I don't know, Adonai, whatever. Something like they each have a different meaning. But these ones that appear in white over here don't have meaning. Those are ones that we could not, that the sender would never intend to send because they're not one of the agreed upon code words. So as long as the received message isn't too far from one of the intended messages, then we can correct it back to where we want it to be, right? The problem comes when we get into a situation like this guy over here. That one's sitting out there in nowhere land. It's not closest to anybody. We don't know where to put it. All right. And you can see that there's lots of opportunity for error messages that are hard to correct over here, right? Like they're all over the place. Well, we can do better than this inefficient packing of circles. We could pack them efficiently like this. So now, although it could still happen that we receive a signal that's not within the sort of allowable distance, there's less room for that because we've been careful about how we jam our circles together, right? They stick together a little better here. And we can do better still in the case of circles. So this is the most efficient packing possible for circles. There's much less space in between, right? So this is an efficient packing of these circles, and we can make those corrections, and we're less likely to. I really had to work to get to fit this guy in there. So what I'm trying to show you is that there's a connection between error correcting codes and our ability to pack circles together very well. Now that applies not only in 2 dimensions with circles, but also 3 dimensions with spheres. And then we could talk about 4, 5, 6, 100 dimensions with the corresponding analog of balls in those spaces. So, and in fact, really, here I drew it in the plane, but it's more accurate because the plane is infinite, right? It goes off in all directions. But as we saw back in this example right here, we really are playing in a finite world. So a more natural setting would be something like this, where we have a surface and we're trying to put circles on that surface and make them fit. And you can see, like right here, for example, here's an area where there's some inefficiency, right? And here, and here, it's pretty efficient. But like in certain areas, there's bigger gaps because it's hard to pack circles on a sphere like this. Okay. I'll make mention to give you an idea about how current these questions are. Like, it was in 1998, the year I started teaching at Rhodes, that this fellow, Thomas Callister Hales, proved just for 3 dimensions, when we're talking about 3-dimensional balls, that a very natural one, like if you go into the grocery store and see how oranges are stacked in the grocery store, that's the most efficient way of stacking. And that includes methods that aren't regular. Like, obviously that way of stacking is very regular, but you could imagine if you just chucked a bunch of oranges into a bin, they wouldn't necessarily arrange themselves in that orderly way. It's really hard to prove results about those non-regular packings because there's a lot of them, and it's hard to describe them really. But it turns out that the grocery store way of packing oranges is the most efficient way possible. And that was only, so when the referees looked at his result in 1998, they said, yeah, we're 99% sure it's right. But it was so complicated that it was hard for them to really be certain. Well, in the intervening years, this fellow Hales, used what are called automated theorem provers to prove that his result was correct. And now there's no doubt. It's absolutely correct. Everybody agrees. There are lots of questions that remain about higher dimensional packings. So for example, the densest regular packings are known for dimensions up to dimension 8. However, the densest known packing in dimension 10 is irregular. So that leaves open the possibility that in some dimensions, the the best packing you could possibly have would be irregular. And that's really sort of counterintuitive for us based on our experiences with low dimensions. But in higher dimensions, this sort of irregularity may wind up being more efficient. There's also this, for some reason, 24 dimensions, there's this super interesting lattice called the Leech Lattice, which is a very efficient way of packing, only in dimension 24. It's just sort of an oddity of these higher dimensional spheres that somehow dimension 24 is special. All right, so that's the end of the mathematics part of what I wanted to say. So let me stop now and just see if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, so I have a quick question.
Go ahead, Charles.
By making the bundle longer, we increase the likelihood that it'll be correct or received correctly. But, you know, in this hypothetical example, suppose we were sending someone's genetic code from Mars to Earth.
Right.
You know, it seems that we couldn't eliminate the possibility of error. We could only.
Right. That's right. That's part of the consequence of Claude Shannon's work. Basically, what he said was, you know, it's sort of his work is probabilistic in nature, and what he did was he introduced this notion of information entropy, and basically he quantified the trade-off between how much robustness you can buy in exchange for the length of the communication. And what that means is, over time, like if you send a really long thing, like that beautiful image that Perseverance sent us, or a genetic code, which is also very lengthy, if you send a long transmission over a noisy channel, even if you make the code really robust, it is definitely still possible that errors can be introduced. That can still happen. All you can do is reduce the amount of error, or the expected number of errors that you'll receive. You can't guarantee that there will be no errors. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that's exactly what I was alluding to.
Excellent. That's a great point, Charles. Thank you for making it.
That if we actually go to Mars and actually stand on that exact spot, we might notice that a pebble that we saw in the picture is not exactly as it is there.
Right. It might be a different color, or, you know, there might be some oddity that was missed. That's right. It could absolutely happen. Other questions? Okay, well, I had a question for you guys. That now, obviously, the stuff that I'm talking about here is not very closely related to Judaism. However, I did want to just share a bit of mathematical culture with you, which also happens to be Jewish culture. So there's two sort of main prizes in mathematics, two main awards. The Fields Medal, there's no Nobel Prize in mathematics. So the Fields Medal is sort of like mathematics version of the Nobel Prize. And the Abel Prize is another very prestigious award. So just out of curiosity, it was sort of, I had anecdotal evidence that maybe it seemed like mathematicians, the Jewish community was maybe overrepresented in the community of mathematicians relative to its representation in the general population. So I did a little looking around on the recipients of these two awards, and here's what I learned. For the Fields Medal, since the Fields Medal was first introduced, there's been a total of 60 recipients, 15 of whom were Jewish. So 25% of the Fields Medal recipients were Jewish. And for the Abel Prize, there have been 24 recipients, of which 8 were Jewish, or 33%. So on the other hand, now these are international prizes. They're not just United States, it's the entire world. The entire world is engaged in mathematics. So worldwide, about 0.2% of the world's population identifies as Jewish. Obviously, even though n is small in these cases, I guess the total, we're looking at just 84 sample points, but it still strikes me that this is a pretty substantial outlier. And I'm just curious if anybody has any thoughts about why that might be.
Well, it seems to me that maybe we should only be looking at the population of PhD awarded mathematicians. And if we're already at 15% of that, then maybe this number isn't as skewed as we think. I mean,
fair enough. Which could also lead to the question, if 15% of the PhD in mathematics population is Jewish, why is that when only 0.2% of the world's population is? I don't have an answer to this. I'm genuinely curious. Go ahead, Charles. You started to speak.
Well, part of it is that we have a rich history of argumentation and a rich history of study, and that some cultures, some people in the world barely develop don't get past verbal language skills. So, you know, you're constantly narrowing the funnel.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. That makes sense. In fact, speaking of the history of argumentation, maybe I'll conclude with a joke. So there was an old rabbi who took ill, and so he went to the hospital. So this was the young rabbi's new chance to try being a rabbi. So the rabbi was there in front of the congregation and said, "Okay, it's time for a prayer. So, will everyone please rise?" And somebody raised their hand and says, "That's not the tradition. We don't stand when we pray." And so he said, "Oh, okay, well, in that case, we'll sit for the prayer." And somebody else raises their hand and says, "No, that's not the tradition. We don't sit for the prayer either." And so he said, "Okay, I'm going to go consult with the old rabbi and find out what the tradition is." So the new rabbi walks down the street to the hospital where the old rabbi was, and some of the congregation came along as well. And so he says to the old rabbi, "Rabbi, is the tradition that we stand when we pray?" And he said, "No." He says, "Okay, so then the tradition is that we sit when we pray." And he said, "No." And he says, "Well, this one says we sit. This one says we stand. They're arguing with each other. I don't know what to do." He goes, "That's the tradition." So I think there is a healthy tradition of argumentation. I really love it. And I think it comes from the tradition of study of the Torah, where there's not a final authority, but rather there's a final text, and different people's interpretation, people will argue over that and in a constructive way. And I think that you may be onto something there, Charles. Any other thoughts before we conclude?
Something else I was thinking about in response to your question is the importance of oral history and oral tradition in Judaism, and that was, oral Torah is a very big part of our culture and our sacred texts, in addition to the written Torah. So there's clearly a lot of the importance of communication in Judaism and in the history of Judaism, I think, is huge, even in the context of Torah and oral Torah in particular.
Yeah, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. And I think, by the way, we may see, if I didn't pull up numbers on this, but if you look, for example, in the legal profession, I think you'll find that Jews are overrepresented there as well. At least that's my anecdotal experience. And that may be similar. It's that same tradition of oral argument and of the argumentative tradition generally applies there as well. Okay, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. I sure did. Thank you for the questions. And I hope you have some good speakers coming up as well.
Yes, thank you so much, Professor Gottlieb. And that's actually a great segue. I can share a little bit about our next lecture, which is coming up on Friday, November 19th from 12 to 1, right back here on Zoom. And that's with a colleague of yours, actually, Professor Gottlieb. It's Professor Rebecca Tuvel, who's a professor of philosophy at Rhodes College. So we're keeping the Rhodes streak going for one more month. Again, that's on Friday, November 19th, and I can send her on the link to sign up for those of you that are interested. So thank you again, Professor Gottlieb, for being here and for sharing such an interesting topic. And thank you to those of you that tuned in to the live to the live session here. The recording will also be available online if you need to go back and mull it over, which I probably will. So thank you again, everyone. And an early Shabbat Shalom to you all.
Sophie, will you please add me to your mailing list so that I can attend these in the future?
Great, of course.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.